Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So today we had Points of Interest once again came out, and it was following along the same lines as the article we had released yesterday to do with the Nuark and the Itzels. So today we actually got to see some footage of these guys running around in the clients. We've got a couple of trailers, a couple of renders, and even in the background throughout the live stream, as you guys should be seeing in the background, they were kind of showing us a little bit of supposedly their homeland. I'm here to talk to you guys about what's going on there, and another thing to do with Guild Wars 1, which I'd like to open up with, really, and this is the 10th anniversary of the original game. It's coming up. It's going to be on April 22nd. Now, for those who don't really know how GW1's handled things for a long time, it hasn't really had any content go in it at all. The last real content it saw was the Winds of Change Guild Wars Beyond chapter, which was focused in Cantha and dealt with the Ministry of Purity and Master Raiko and a lot of very, very cool things. But since that time, and especially since Guild Wars 2 has come out, the game's really seen very, very, very little in the way of anything new. ArenaNet really aren't dedicating any resources to it whatsoever. They have a couple of systems that run the game in the background. I don't know whether there's active GM going on there. For the most part, the game runs flawlessly. It's not laggy. It's even got a pretty big community, as I've expressed surprise at over many recent videos, but it hasn't had any updates. In fact, what they did was around the 8th anniversary, so 2 years ago, so after Guild Wars 2's launch, they really kind of went ham with the automation of their festivals. So they have lots of festivals, more festivals than GW2 has. And one that they've always celebrated and has always been a pretty big deal in that game is every time the game becomes a year older. It was a bigger deal in Guild Wars 1 than Guild Wars 2, I feel, because mini-pets were... There was no, like, gem store back then. There was much less microtransaction stuff going on. And mini-pets were kind of an exclusive feature bound to the New Year celebration. The only way you'd get mini-pets if you weren't buying them from other players was to wait a year, and your character, once it became a year old, would get a special present, and you'd have a mini come out of it. You could get a white mini, which usually you would, but very lucky people would get purple minis, which would sell for quite a lot. You could even get a gold mini, which was very, very rare, and there'd be like only 2 released per set. So this year, and starting on the 22nd, is not just any new year for Guild Wars, it's the 10th anniversary of the game. So this should be a big deal, you know, even if we're only Guild Wars 2 players. I think a lot of you guys listening who only play GW2 might not care that much, but if you think about it, this is the birth of the franchise. It may not be the start of ArenaNet, they would have been founded earlier, but for many of us, this is the start of the franchise. This should be a big deal. This is such a big deal to me, even a decade. This is only going to come around once, that I would have liked to have seen something even in Guild Wars 2 be reflected. But are we getting anything? It seems like no, not really. It's kind of depressing. What they've done on their main website is thrown up. This seems to be on just a yearly rotation. I don't think they're paying anyone anymore to manually go in and write these event pages for old Guild Wars 1 stuff. And they're saying here, look, another year has passed. It's time once again to throw open the Xingji Boardwalk, rev up the roller beetles and so on. All the things that they've been doing as standard since the 8-year celebration, and they put everything kind of on automation. And here you'll see that they save with the timing. It starts at 12 o'clock on April 22nd to 12 o'clock on April 29th. There's nothing else on this page that suggests anything's going to be different for the 10 years of Guild Wars at all, and isn't that kind of sad? Turns out that actually there is one slight tweak. The Guild Wars 1 Twitter account did reveal that the event was in fact going to be running for longer than April 29th. It's going to run until May 6th, I believe was the date. So essentially they're going to run it for 1 week longer than they usually would because it's the 10th year. Well, whoop-de-doo, we get 1 extra week, and that's about it. So a few people are kind of sad about this fact, and I don't know, I wasn't expecting anything new to come into Guild Wars 1, but perhaps, you know, adding something old back into the game that's already there, you know, like some of the Commando events we had during April Fools or something, would have been a nice touch. I'm not even saying that I'm necessarily an advocate for them dedicating resources to this very old game instead of GW2, but I've been on a bit of a nostalgia kick recently. You guys have seen a couple of Guild Wars 1 videos already on the channel, and I am shocked by how many people are still playing it, so I can understand their upsets. One comment actually I found kind of interesting. This guy on Reddit, actually -3 points, so wasn't necessarily in favor with everyone else, says they were capable of releasing expansions at 6 months intervals with 60 to 80 employees. Now they have 350 plus. If they relocate just 10 to 20 people to Guild Wars 1, on to keep making Guild Wars Beyond chapters and releasing outfits, etc., they could make money out of Guild Wars 1. People are still playing the games, and many would start playing again at the sight of the slightest support on ArenaNet's side. GW1 and 2 are very different games, and I'm sure they could coexist on the market. It's an interesting perspective, and I think this person's absolutely right in that they are very different games, and they're not really pulling from one another. You get countless GW1 fans who say, I don't like Guild Wars 2, and you get countless, even more, I would say, GW2 players who just cannot bring themselves to go back to Guild Wars 1 and enjoy it, even though it's an aged game. They just find the philosophies and the way it works to be very different. You know, a lot of people will still tell you that Guild Wars 1 isn't even supposed to be an MMO, it's supposed to be a competitive online role-playing game. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't really agree with what this person's saying here. As someone responded to them on Reddit, this whole 6 months thing is a complete fallacy. If you ever see someone in the Guild Wars 2 community complaining that, you know, somehow the devs are lazy or that they don't produce content at the rate they used to, the truth is they did only ever hit this 6-month window once. Prophecies came out, they announced the 6-month idea sort of just before Factions release, and then 6 months later Nightfall did release, though they hit it, but after that point they already knew that it was not sustainable, and they took a long time to produce Eye of the North, which itself was smaller than a fully fledged campaign. So I don't think necessarily it's as easy as throwing just a couple of people back at Guild Wars 1, but I have been a bit entertained by the idea that maybe we could have support for both games running in tandem. Maybe one day that may happen, but I think it's very, very unlikely. Anyway, I thought I'd fill you guys in on what exactly is going on with the anniversary, why some people are upset, and frankly, I think it's a bit of a shame too myself. Keep an eye on my channel when the anniversary does go out, maybe a little bit after the anniversary. I will do something of my own in honor of Guild Wars 1. I'm going to be doing something a little bit special because actually a personal milestone of mine is coming up too, and there'll be a video on that later, so look out for that. Alright, moving on to points of interest. I want to talk about GW1 for too long. What about the new stuff? So, besides the glimpse at the homeland of these tribes in the background, we did get 2 full-on animation videos that were produced by Ruby. She actually slowed them down. I'm guessing she captured like 60 frame footage and put it down to 30 or something, so we can really look very closely at the animations of the Itzel and the Nuhawk. Now, what I found to be very interesting, and you guys will notice too as soon as we roll into the Nuhawk footage, is the Nuhawk are huge! How could ArenaNet have had such a big post on their blog yesterday, on their website yesterday, and not talked at all about the immense size of these bullfrog guys? This is a huge element of who they are. I was not expecting this whatsoever. They're massive. This is that really kind of juicy, big scale monster that we see very little of actually in the open world outside of just odd bosses and champions associated with dynamic events. So this is really cool. I love the look of this guy as he's running around this Nuhawk, and even the Itzel 2 are pretty damn big. They were actually talking specifically about the scale in the live stream. The Itzel are supposed to be, and have kind of been inspired by tree frogs, as they say here, and the way that they move. You would kind of expect them to be a lot smaller, right? A lot smaller. But they said original versions of the Itzel were a smaller scale. The problem with Guild Wars 2 is we all know skill effect, Zerg content, right? You just wouldn't see them, unfortunately, throughout the course of normal gameplay. Maybe if you're running around on your own, you might be able to appreciate them a little bit. But ultimately, having them small, having them Asura size, perhaps, as they originally had them, wasn't working for them, so now they're much bigger. And they're about the size of a Norn, okay? So the smaller of these 2 groups of Hylek are Norn-sized, and the Nuhawk, they say, are like 2 to 3 times the size of the Norn, and these things are absolute beasts. The animations, I'll let you guys come to your own conclusions about how much you like them. I know a lot of people are still kind of upset about how top-heavy these, the Itzel in particular are. I think they look gorgeous, though. There's supposedly a few animations we don't see in these videos, too. The idea of the Nuhawk cleaning their eyes with their giant tongues by, like, slapping it on their face and rubbing it around was a really cool-sounding animation that I don't believe we get to see in these videos, so stuff to look out for once the expansion actually does drop. I found it interesting, this idea that the Itzel were originally very small, and in particular also it was mentioned that when the creature team were looking at making these creatures, they were looking at some of the original concept art they had for Hylek. And in yesterday's video, when I was talking about them, I actually went to the Guild Wars 1 wiki, looked up Hylek, and found some really cool concept art there. I'll put it back on the screen now. This is kind of interesting to me. You know, this was concept art for the Hylek, or Heket, way back when, and this has to have been the shot that they were looking at, right? And they're like, look how much more frog-like these guys look. Why don't we try and draw something from this? So I'd be very surprised if this wasn't exactly what they were talking about, and that's how we ultimately ended up with the Itzel. I do like that they kind of took the Hylek and tried to add so much more to them. I think of all of the terribly lip-synced characters you meet, or races you meet in the personal story, the Hylek are absolutely the most offensive. They look horrible, especially in the side-by-side little cutscene things. So I like the thought they were like, God, this race, we need to do something about this. Let's add some new ones that look really cool, and this is what they ended up coming up with. Not that we'll have the side-by-side conversations anyway. There was a little bit of lore. They didn't really touch on too much here. It was more just how they look and how they work in the game. But Matthew Medina, who was actually responsible for a lot of the base cities, I'm going to talk about cities again in a little bit, of the game at launch. He actually talked about a little bit of the story, you know, things that we already knew about Army Yali and about how the Nuhark have only recently come into the jungle. Did clarify actually that the Nuhark did once worship Zintel, but since they came and interacted with the Itzel, that kind of changed, and this is one of the reasons why other Zintel Hylek want to come in, riding their beetles to reconvert them. But he did also talk, and I found this kind of interesting, that the reason why they abandoned Zintel in favor of Army Yali, you know, the jungle in general, is because it can get very dark in the jungle, and you know, I suppose in the very low down areas of the jungle, this mysterious, cavey, deep underground, perhaps biome that's very thick and overgrown, that we've heard very little about, apparently can get very, very dark, and I wonder whether we'll see this reflected in gameplay. This is one of those little comments that makes me think, you know, he's saying that it gets very dark in the jungle where the sun won't shine. Is there going to be some kind of mechanic around that? How dark are we really talking when we get down there into that biome? It's enticing to me to think that, yes, this is going to be an explorable area. But that makes sense, you know, we've got these guys living in the jungle. They don't always see the sun, unlike Zintel Hylek, who, you know, the sun goes away during night, I suppose, but these guys, it's a much bigger part of their life to be in the dark, and so they end up worshipping Army Yali instead. I thought that was a really cool little touch. Another thing that they seem to hint at a little bit, but then got a little bit sidetracked, so what I'm about to say could be wrong. It sounded a lot, though, like they were saying, when the Nuhark and Itzel first began to interact with one another, at first there were like fights, small fights perhaps, you know, they were a bit uneasy around one another. They didn't just fall into like this bromance straight away, okay? They didn't fall into it instantly. And actually it sounded a bit like there were two specific Hylek, one Itzel and one Nuhark, who realized that they could work together, and upon realizing they could work together, then the rest sort of saw the value of that and came into the fold. So it sounds like they may actually have a story worked out between two specific, and this could be something, you know, some old legend, something many of the Hylek will be talking to us about in the jungle. Maybe they're even still alive and in positions of great power among their societies. I don't know, this is all just speculation I'm throwing on it, but it kind of sounded like that was what they were doing, and that's a cool story if they have set something like that up. They do also say, of course, that even though many Nuhark and Itzel are going to be friendly to us, many also aren't. They're still tribal, just like all the Zintel Hylek we saw at launch, you know, where the red ones would be angry with us while the blue ones wouldn't. Ruby, in particular, talked about fighting them in the live stream, and of course, we would have expected this, though we've been thinking about them on friendly terms for so much now. I wonder how many actually we're going to be fighting against, and why? Why? Are they going to be like Mordrum corrupted Nuhark? Think about that for a second. We do get these cool renders as well. I'd just scroll through for you guys. Looked really awesome. In particular, there's some fun ones that they wanted to show. These won't be represented in game. Just kind of some fun ideas of Nuhark interacting with Itzel at the same time. And this, of course, doesn't mean that they'll be mounted and running around like this. It's just kind of a fun thing that they did. And I'd like to see them do more of that. Even though this isn't ever going to appear in game, it's a fun thought to me. And it helps me imagine the way these two peoples have been interacting with one another, like, much better than if they hadn't shown it to us. So I really want to end the video by talking a little bit about their city. So we were seeing it a little bit in the background, and when asked what their favourite thing was, Matthew said that his favourite thing about these races was the city. He talked about a place in Disneyland, like some giant treehouse place, I don't know, that he loved, and that this reminded him of that so much. Sounds like a great place built in the canopies, and what I find kind of interesting is two things. First of all, that they have like some kind of homeland, that they have one specific city, one area. That was not my interpretation until today of these peoples. I was expecting just to see lots of random villages and settlements around the jungle, not necessarily one big area where they all congregated. And now that we know that there's going to be one big city, one big area that they congregate, will we as players perhaps view this as a city? I mean, like, mechanically view this on par as a city as other cities like Ratasum, the Grove, Divinity's Reach, and so forth? Or will this maybe be a little bit more Ebonhawk-like? Now, that may sound crazy, and it may not even necessarily be something Guild Wars 2 needs, but we are talking about an expansion right now, and I kind of realized today that there's a lot of things I always took for granted before Heart of Thorns was announced just would be a part of expansion. And do you know what I would have taken for granted before they started giving us specifics about Heart of Thorns? I would have taken for granted the idea we'd get new capital cities we could go to, new giant hubs. And now that sounds kind of crazy. You know, what if we did in the Maguma Jungle now have another city? Again, I don't think there's necessarily a great need for it, but it would be pretty cool for new players who come in after the expansion pack to see, oh look, there's, you know, this other massive hub place connected via a surrogate to everywhere else. And maybe prospectively in the future, a long time down the line, down the road, if they ever do add, you know, the Hylic as a playable race, they've got a perfect starting area, haven't they? Even though it's surrounded by level 80 zones. I don't know. Curious. The more reasonable part of me is expecting it to be like Ebonhawk. But again, these are just weird things that I'm now realizing, oh, we could get an expansion here that doesn't actually offer a big new city for us. Will it be in its own map? I'm not sure. But that's pretty much it, guys. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the Itzel and the Nuark. Do you like how big the Nuark is? And for those of you who are still watching me that were big fans of Guild Wars 1, does it make you a little bit sad that they're basically not getting anything at all for 10 years? The first decade of ArenaNet's first game, nothing except like an extra week of celebrations content that we've seen a million times over. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. It would be a crazy thing to think of a world where Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2 were continuing to have updates. I just don't know how profitable it is. Then again, Guild Wars 2's got a pretty big population. Oh, whatever. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I guess I will see you tomorrow, which will probably be a Q&A, I'm thinking. Anyway, cheers, guys. Have a great one. See you tomorrow.